Hi, I'm Meredith from Beadalon, and today I'm going to show you how to make Shamballa style bracelets using Beadalon wire. I like to use 0.024 wire for the base and 0.018 wire to do the knots, but you can experiment with different gauges, different colors, and different kinds of wire to get a different look. You can also use a lot of different kinds of beads. Today, I'm going to be using some 6mm Swarovski round crystals. But again, you can use 8mm crystals, 10mm crystals, even cubes, and get really interesting results. So the first step is to use the 0.024 wire as your base. And I like to pull just enough out so that I can comfortably use a length on my clipboard. You can use a little more, you can use a little bit less, but that's how I like to do it. The second step is to use your size 4 crimp tube and your 0.024 Beadalon wire. We'll string that up and form a loop. Now you want to make sure that this loop is going to be big enough to fit over the button that you're using for a clasp. You can use a large button, a small button, you could even use a bead. I like to use these Swarovski crystal buttons, but anything would work. So I'm just double checking to make sure that that will fit through with a little extra room because I am going to put a crimp cover over it. And I'll use my mighty crimpers to go ahead and crimp that in place. Okay. I'm going to then use my favorite sparkle handle tools and clip the end of the wire. Next, I'll take a crimp cover. These are our 7mm sparkle crimp covers. And snap that into place. And again, I use my mighty crimping tool to close that crimp cover. Now this would be a good time to double check and make sure that your button fits through that loop. Better to know now than after you've done your whole bracelet. So next thing I'm going to do is use my clipboard as my workspace. You can do it without a clipboard, but I find it's a lot easier to have something to hold it down. You can also use a clip at the bottom to hold the wire into place. So I'm going to pre-string my beads, and I found that with 6mm beads, 12 knots is the perfect amount to fit my wrist. The best part, one of the best parts of this design is it's really versatile. So you can add knots or subtract knots or use knots as a part of a design element. Let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8. To make it exactly the size that you need. So here, like I said, I figured that 11 is the perfect number for my wrist. So I'm just going to go ahead and use my binder clip to clip this down. The next step is to take the 0.018 silver color beading wire. I like to use the silver color instead of the silver plated because I find that it knots better without the stainless steel core. I'm going to take about 5 feet, which is just about my wingspan, and snip that off. The next step is to center your wire right up against that crimp cover and just tie an overhand knot. I like to do right over left first. I'm going to make sure that I have that centered, and I am going to tighten up that knot. So now once I have my first knot in place, then these two wires become the wires that I'm going to knot with. So the first knot I do with my right hand. I make a 4, with the wire, and I take the left hand and I go underneath and through that wire. So I make my first knot. Since I started with my right, I'm now going to make my 4 with my left. And I'm going to take my wire over and under and through. Move my clippers out of the way and tighten that up. So you can do this knot as tight or as loose as you'd like. I like to make really tight knots. But you can get a nice effect with loose knots as well. So I've lost track in my counting, so I'm just going to go through and look, and I can see I have 1, 2, 3 knots here. And I'm going to do a total of 6. 4. 5. And 6. Now I always end with a knot on the left with my right one ready for the next knot. So the next step is I will move one of my beads into place, and then I will capture it into place by using my next knot. So here I'll go over, around, and through, and on the next side. Don't be concerned if that knot doesn't shore up at first, because after you go through and you're ready to make the next pass, it'll tighten right up into place. And now I will continue making my knots and moving my beads into place until I get to the end of my bracelet. The easiest way to finish it is to take the size 4 crimp tube and string it over all 3 of the wires that are left. Move it into place and just make sure that you're neatly finishing up the wires at the bottom. Next, I'll take my mighty crimping tool and just go ahead and get that crimp tube in place. And then I like to just clip one of the wires. Use my crimp cover, snap it into place, and cover it. Cover that crimp using my mighty crimping tool. So the last step is to attach the button. So to do that, we'll put on that last size 4 crimp tube and the button. Come around the button and back through the crimp tube. You can snip the wires a little bit if they get too fiddly, and it makes it easier for you to do. You want to make sure that you don't crimp that button too tight. You want to have it a little less wiggle room than this, but you definitely want it to have some wiggle room so that if you need to flip it over, you can. So I'm just double checking to make sure that I can flip it easily. And then I'm going to add just a skosh more room to account for the crimp cover that I will be attaching. So last time, using those mighty crimp pliers, get that crimp in place. And using my sparkle tools, snip off those remaining edges, and we are almost done. Just going to go ahead and add one last crimp cover. That nice and tight. And here we are, my finished Shamballa style bracelet made with Beadalon silver beading wire.